Well, hello, good morning, and welcome to KPMG's Reframing Sustainability Panel, Building Resilience and Driving Growth. I'm Richard Andrews, and I'm the Sustainability Advisory Lead for KPMG in the UK. That clip we've just seen comes from our Reframing Sustainability campaign, which we've been running over the last year, and I'm looking forward to exploring this theme with you today. As a Yorkshireman, I'm especially proud that we are the headline sponsor for Reset Connect North, and that this is a key part of West Yorkshire Innovation Festival. So today I'm delighted to be joined by my panel. So Bibi Rodgers, Head of Sustainability at Quorn Foods, Jerome Baddley, Director of Sustainability at Centre Parcs, Mark Lee, the CEO of Deep Green, and Lewis Richards, CTO for Energy at Microsoft. So they'll give some opening remarks in a minute, and then we'll have time for audience Q&A. But first, why do we need to reframe sustainability? In a constantly changing world, how we recognise and how we articulate the value of sustainable business needs to change. The robust focus that we've had on regulatory demands has, in some cases, overshadowed or sucked the energy away from more strategic initiatives, and also has diverted us a little from the increasing need for resilience to address shocks to business. And as some of that regulatory focus has eased away a little, forward-looking organisations are beginning to reframe sustainability both through the lens of business resilience and also as a driver of value creation, innovation, growth, and importantly, competitive advantage. There are lots of different lenses on resilience. So financial resilience, have you got enough resources? Operational resilience, maintaining product and service delivery. And that could include looking at climate resilience and the links to energy, to water, to supply chains, and the impact of climate events on physical sites. And then there's commercial and strategic resilience. And there's also an emerging theme of what I call, or what might be called, societal resilience. So what is the role of private enterprise in supporting the communities that they operate in and the broader societal objectives and resilience during shocks? And we'll touch on that a little bit through today's panel. In terms of growth, there are opportunities ranging from AI-enabled decarbonisation, and we'll touch on that across the panel a little bit, to bold new business models. So there are some real opportunities, and they're here right now. So it's time to reframe the conversation. But before we go to some questions, I'd like to maybe introduce the panel a little bit more. So maybe if I come to you first, Bibi, could you tell us a little bit about your role and the role of sustainability in your job?
Hi. Good morning, everybody. I'm Bibi Rodgers Hunt. I'm Head of Sustainability for Quorn Foods. For those of you who are not familiar with Quorn Foods, we are Europe's largest alternative protein manufacturer, and something that you guys might not be aware of is that we are a very proud Yorkshire-based company. All corn that gets made in the whole world, that gets sent to Australia, that gets sent to Canada, South Africa, is all made in Stokesley in North Yorkshire, in the North York Moors. In terms of sustainability for Quorn, we've been doing a lot of the right things for years. We've been product carbon footprinting for 12 years. Mycoprotein itself has 30 times lower emissions than beef, 12 times lower than chicken. But to bring it to the theme of this panel today, actually we haven't been using that to drive growth necessarily. So a big part of our journey for this year coming is actually how do we use that as a commercial engine, as a growth engine with our retailers, making sure that our selling colleagues understand how to sell that story, making sure that we've got credible, robust frameworks for that, making sure that our consumers understand the role that we play in their lives. So that's a big part of why sustainability continues to be the past and the future of Quorn Foods.
Amazing, and love to hear a little bit more on that as we explore the conversation. Jerome.
So, Jerome Baddley, Director of Sustainability for Centre Parcs UK and Ireland. As a business, we run 5 UK villages, one in Ireland. I can't forget that. So we have a foot in 2 regulatory environments, the EU environment and obviously the UK regulatory space. And we also run 6 forests. And managing and running 6 entire villages and 6 forests comes with...
They lost you for a second.
Lost me. I'll have to talk loudly. So managing and operating 6 basically small towns comes with all of the complications and opportunities around sustainability that you'd expect for an operation of that scale. We've been running since 1987. We built our first village in the UK in Nottinghamshire in 1987. Coincidentally, the same year sustainable development was defined by the United Nations. And that first village, we took on commercial woodland, and we repurposed it, made it more biodiverse. We started a village at the same time as the coal mines were closing down in that area. So we created jobs in a rural community. And we provide an offer to our guests, and we have done ever since, that actually improves and enhances sort of relaxation, supports our guests to de-stress. Obviously an increasingly important offer in an increasingly stressful world. But we hope our guests leave feeling happier, healthier, and more relaxed. So our product really is that sort of level of relaxation and sort of reducing people's stress levels. I think certainly in terms of resilience, operating in forests and operating a large estate and trying to offer a product into an increasingly stressful world, hopefully, and I think we do offer a really valuable social, economic and environmental benefit to the UK and to Ireland. But expressing that in a way that actually really underlines the importance of that to our guests, to our other stakeholders, is a journey we're on. And I think we've learned a great deal over the last couple of years with the challenge from things like the CSRD.
We will keep moving down the road to Mark, although as we get into the conversation, I think we'll mix it up a little bit.
Sure.
Intros if we move to Mark and then through to Lewis.
Thanks, Richard. It sounds like my Madonna mic is working, unlike Jerome's, so I'll stick with that. Morning, everyone. Mark Lee, Chief Executive of Deep Green. So in very simple terms, we develop and operate heat reuse data centres. So what we do is we bring conventional data centres to areas where the heat is required, and we're very fixed around only targeting sites and opportunities where we can actually reuse all the heat from that data centre for the good of the community, for our partners that we land alongside. So best examples of that are we're opening a site in Manchester in April, which is heating the Trafford Leisure Centre swimming pool. So we have a conventional data centre. It pumps the heat through the fence and it heats the swimming pool next door. We also provide swimming lessons and all sorts of other community benefits alongside that within Manchester. Within this region specifically, we're developing a site in Bradford where we will sit adjacent to the Bradford District Heat Network, and we will provide free heat to that network, decarbonising their heat network and providing heat to commercial and governmental and residential people and businesses in the central Bradford area. We're backed by Octopus, so we're funded by Octopus. And then I suppose just the question you had at the beginning, what does sustainability mean to us? Well, look, it kind of means everything, right? We're trying to take an industry that is a bit of a social and environmental pariah right now and look at that from a completely different end, and we'll get into that, I'm sure, as we go through this, but come at it from a completely different angle and think about where that can actually benefit the community in which it lands in.
Cool. Hi everyone, I'm Lewis. Like Richard said, I work for Microsoft. I suppose my current role is I'm the CTO for energy in the UK and the US. I look after National Grid, so my job is really to help National Grid, who are just about to start their next 5-year transformation effort. They're just about to spend $70 billion on decarbonising the grid. So just like pretty much most companies on the planet, everybody uses some part of our platform. So my job is really to help customers to be efficient and effective at an organisation point of view in terms of how they use those technologies. And then from an individual point of view, we focus really on, I focus on capability and confidence, I think. And so part of my job really is helping people to understand the digital world that you can't physically see, if that makes sense. And I think when it comes to sustainability and resilience for me, I tier it that way. The role is to help everyday normal people who are surrounded by this stuff make sense of it and try and contextualize and hold in their head pictures of, if you're using technology, what does that really mean from an impact point of view, and how you can be better at it and effective at it when you think about data and technology and AI at the moment, because that's the latest buzzword. But we kind of, that's kind of what I do as well. And I did the same thing for the water industry for about 3 years for Microsoft as well. So I've gone from water through sustainability now in energy. So yeah, that's what I do.
Amazing, right at the heart of the conversation.
Well, I get a lot of fingers pointed at me as well. So feel free to point more fingers today if you want.
Well, people will be saving up questions. but first, we have some things we talked about as a panel to touch on. And as I said, part of the idea behind this panel is to reframe the conversation and to talk a little bit about the role of sustainability in building resilience. And maybe if we come to Jerome first. So urban planning's quite an important part of your role. We've touched a little bit, even in the introductions, around the interconnectedness within networks. Can you talk about some of the challenges and some of the opportunities that brings?
I'll test my mic first. It's still not working.
No.
Still not working.
Yes, I mean, obviously, as I say, managing small towns and building small towns. I mean, we're just about to build a new village in Scotland in the borders, and we're expanding our village in Ireland at the moment as well. So we have quite a significant role in terms of construction and development as a business. But I mean, in terms of resilience, there are maybe 3 areas that are really important for us in this. I mean, one is around biodiversity, as I've mentioned. Another is around that road to net zero. And then there's also about brand value, I think. So, I mean, our interaction with biodiversity has been second nature to us. It's been part and parcel of our journey as a business from the beginning. However, we've not really crystallized that into an expression of something in our reporting as such. It's just a given when people spend time with us. And similarly for investors, and we're a private equity-owned company, so that appreciation of the most important asset to us being our forests is always there in the background, but it's not necessarily expressed in numbers. But in terms of understanding resilience, certainly things like the UK CFD have meant we've had to focus very heavily on, obviously we like the rain, the wind and the sun, but they're not always our friends in terms of, maintaining a 24/7, 100% uptime operation with 2 million guests a year. So understanding about that level of resilience has got more and more important over the last few years. Through the CSRD, we adopted nature as a formal stakeholder in our business. And actually, I think that part of that process around stakeholder engagement and recognising nature as a stakeholder has actually, I think, helped improve our resilience around biodiversity, at least. In terms of net zero, there's a huge amount of work we have to do to reduce the emissions from our business. We already buy 100% green electricity, as I'm sure many do. But the electrification journey comes with a huge amount of infrastructure challenge. Not just the national infrastructure challenge, but we have to increase our incoming power. We have to address the distribution of power around our villages. So it's not an insurmountable challenge, but it's one that takes time and applied effort. So, but of course, understanding the resilience that gives us in terms of reduced exposure to very topically volatile gas prices and the like, I think is obviously acutely in our minds, because that's quite a significant element of our bottom line. A whole town uses a lot of energy. And the last point around brand value, I mean, I've just touched on it beforehand. I mean, really, those elements of the positive health benefits people get from being with us, the improving of biodiversity in our forests, and also the money that flows into the local rural communities. I think the work we've done through CSRD to evaluate what's material to us has identified those areas as areas where we need a net positive benefit. So actually, in terms of positive resilience, in terms of brand value, I think the journey through CSRD has really helped us identify not just risks, but how we can best position ourselves in terms of our brand.
Yeah, I think we were talking in the speakers' lounge earlier, weren't we? Actually, there's some of the challenges in looking at CSRD, but also there are actually going through that exercise has, I guess, had benefits that weren't expected or broader benefits for the business in terms of thinking about the business as a whole. If we go back a little, you touched on some of those technical solutions and some of the challenges. Obviously, the data centres and heat have their own technical challenges. And Mark, you touched on the work you're doing in Bradford. Can you expand on, I guess, some of the challenges, but also some of the benefits a little bit more?
Sure. I mean, firstly, it sounds like Jerome needs 5 or 6 new data centres.
We need the power first.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, no, I think you touched on a very, very important point in terms of the power, and I know it's very easy to bash the grid and talk about issues we have around distribution in this country. So I won't get into that particularly, but just
Ghost in the machine.
Yeah. Could we get another one from somewhere else, or would that just mean
we can? we can hear the sound, Des. I think you're back on.
I'm back on. Let me take a step back for a second. Computers are incredibly efficient heaters. What people perhaps don't understand when they think about it and look at a data center and that power consumption is that a vast amount of that energy that goes into the servers, into the chips, is actually converted into heat energy. So they are incredibly efficient heaters. And the industry has this term waste heat, right? Which I always think is just the most ridiculous way to term what is a resource and a requirement that other people need. So from our perspective, what we have done is taken that and looked at the heat end of things and thought, right, we're energy folk, we're not data center folk at heart, we're energy folk. Let's look at how we can use that heat, harness it in the most efficient way. So we have this I'm cautious about how I use this. It's not actually technically correct, but we talk about using electrons twice. So you take the Bradford example that you just talked about there, where One Energy, who are a district heat provider, have installed, are in process of installing a heat network in downtown Bradford, central Bradford. We will land next to them. We will push heat out of our chips, out of our servers, into their energy center. And what that allows them to do is 2 things. One is it allows them to decarbonize the heat that they supply because it's electrified rather than through gas. I've lost my train of thought slightly on the second point. So it allows them to be extremely efficient, and it allows us to effectively use the electrons twice, because what you'd be using from a data processing perspective, we're also now using from a heat perspective. It's not actually technically completely correct, but we do talk about using electrons twice. So that's what we're doing in Bradford. We are also looking at how we can apply that into other industrial scenarios. It is about 35 to 50 degree heat, so it's not really in high-grade industrial heat, but there are lots of opportunities where we do that, and we're seeing others, and I know, Lewis, we talked about it a little bit before as well, we're seeing others in the industry starting to move towards heat reuse, move towards that kind of technology and recapturing some of the energy that they historically have put into the sky, vented into the atmosphere.
And that's a nice segue into Lewis, and maybe to help avoid some of the brickbats from later. Great to hear a little bit more about what that means for Microsoft. I know you're building a new data center here in Leeds.
Well, that's part of the challenge as well, I suppose. I mean, data center projects, you don't just build a data center overnight. They're long-term capital build projects, and we don't build data centers. Microsoft themselves. Obviously, they're built for us to design specifications, and we kind of sit on both sides of the coin because the challenge we have in Leeds at the moment is not that we've spent the 150 million on the ground to do the work. The challenge for turning that on as a data centre is, again, it's access to power and resources to build it, the whole thing. So, but we also then, obviously, on the other side, help people like National Grid and all the water companies around those things. So we sit in the middle of it, I suppose, in terms of where that thing. Our job is to help evolve the design to Mark's point, to make them as efficient, as effective as possible, and specify that's what we want in a data center, how they're built, and that kind of thing. But then we're also helping through our kind of financial levers to help the grid modernize and decarbonize. And as well, a good example is we've got a thing called the Climate Innovation Fund. It's like $1 billion fund that we've used, and it's solely it's used to invest in startups and companies that develop new products and services. So one of those is a good example is using AI is called Line Vision. And Line Vision, their capability is basically they monitor transmission on the electric networks, on the wires, basically. And their whole purpose is to squeeze out more capacity on the existing network as well. So if you think about the 70 billion that National Grid is going to spend in the UK and the US over the next 5 years in transmission and distribution, well, again, for every time that they want to, this is the whole thing about the UK as well. We love doing this. Is like, we all want better, cheaper power distributed from offshore, onshore. No one wants a pylon. So for every single thing that you want, there's uproar everywhere you go. It's like, oh, no one's against solar. I just don't want it in the field next to me. No one was against it. I want to. Why aren't you doing stuff? But I don't want any pylons or wires. So you have this tension point all the time, I think. And what we're trying to do is you have to help squeeze every single electron through the existing networks that you can to make them efficient and effective and those kind of things. And we do the same thing with water as well, that kind of stuff. So there's constant innovation, I think, an iteration of how data center the designs of those evolve. And to Mark's point then, it's about the inputs and the outputs. You're trying to make them as efficient and balanced as possible, really, as you move forward. And you've got to take into account as well, I think we've got something like 300 data centers at the moment, but that's probably going to double over the next couple of years. Newer ones that come on, the design process and the land management process has these new factors in play in terms of thinking about energy, heat reuse, water reuse. But you've also got to think about what can you do to retrofit existing data centers, potentially, if you can, to make them as efficient and effective as possible from a water and energy point of view as well. So you have to and all of that goes on. It's just most people have no idea that goes on. I mean, most people don't know what the inside of a data center looks like, or what, we did a thing in London at our AI event last year, which is an example, and one of my colleagues, Tom, gets up and he's got this presentation. We do these virtual data center tours, and he put a photograph up of, it was the Dublin data center complex, and everybody in the audience was taking, there must be like the same amount of people, everybody was taking photographs of the PowerPoint slide of the data center on the slide deck. I was furious anyway, because I was thinking all those images were going up to the cloud, and it was a really efficient use of cloud storage. That really
just needed to give a QR.
Yeah, that really annoyed me.
It.
But then I said to Tom afterwards, I said, next time I'm going to get you to change the photograph and put a Tesco distribution centre on there and just say it's a data centre. Because people would be oblivious. It's a box, I couldn't, you know what I mean? So it's having those pictures. I think we've got to do more from an education point of view as well, to help people understand what actually powers the digital world. Because I think more people understand it, and you understand you can hold the pictures of it in your head a bit more, you're more likely to nudge people's behaviours, which is the important bit.
Brilliant. We might come back to that as we go through, but as we were discussing and planning this panel, we talked on a range of topics. So I think it'd be good to just touch a little bit more on supply chains and supply chain resilience. And I know, Bibi, you've got some particularly interesting insight, particularly as you look at human rights risks in the supply chain.
Yeah, I think if you'd asked me even just 3 years ago, why do we look after people in our supply chain in terms of human rights, I would have said, because it's the right thing to do. We're a room full of sustainability professionals. We're all nice people, aren't we? I think I'm looking at you. You all look like nice people. We like to do things because they're nice to do. And that's probably where my head was at a few years ago. And then gradually I started to realise what a resilience power play human rights assessment actually is in your supply chain. There was a particular story in the BBC, I don't know if anybody saw it. It was about a year ago, where the BBC went into supermarkets, into Waitrose, into Tesco, into Asda, bought tomato puree in those supermarkets and tested the mineral content of those tomato purees, and they could see that the sort of mineral signature of this tomato puree that was called Italian tomato puree that Waitrose had bought from Italy in good faith actually was grown in areas of China that could only have been harvested and processed by people under forced labour. That was the only way that those tomatoes had been grown and were going into British consumers' mouths. And it gave me chills, and it's what I now use with my procurement teams to go, yes, human rights are important, they're a nice thing to have, but also it's a resilience, it's a brand identity, it's a power play, it's something to stop your brand getting trashed in a minute. We, as Quorn and Centre Parcs, we are consumer-facing businesses. Trust is built in hours. The trust is built in years and is lost in hours. It can just go. You build that brand identity, you build trust with your consumers, and you can just go. You have to be able to give your consumers a reason to trust you, and that's actually by having those processes in place that mean you're doing your due diligence and that you really are covering their backs to make sure that you're doing the right things for them.
Brilliant. And you touched on Jerome as another consumer-focused business. Can you add anything?
I was just going to take a slightly different tack, but I completely agree with everything you say, of course. The challenges we've had around increasing due diligence through the supply chain have been, palpable over the last couple of years. I mean, the intensity. I mean, I feel slightly unfortunate to be the only person on this panel who's been affected by the CSRD, but that level of scrutiny that we had to go through in our double materiality assessment to consider the role or the impacts on supply chain against every line was really quite hard work, and I really feel for my procurement colleagues because they've got it from every direction at the moment in terms of increasing data for packaging, increasing data for forestry, increasing data for from every angle, and they're under quite a lot of pressure. But the angle that's worth also looking at it from. It's not just about risk mitigation. It's also about identifying great practice. And really, sometimes if we don't ask the questions, we don't find out the answers. And that level of supplier collaboration and communication and engagement is also really important. And we had an example recently where, of course, we do the enhanced due diligence with our strategic suppliers and those we identify as potential high risk. But we purchase a lot of Christmas trees every year. And for a business that's focused on forests, that's an area of very visible engagement with forestry. So, as we were engaging with new suppliers of Christmas trees, I asked our ecology manager and our forestry manager, we have both, to go out to our potential new supplier in Scotland and to see how they were, growing these trees. And we didn't know what we'd find. I was nervous that we'd find some sort of monoculture crop somewhere that we'd then have to go, sorry, we can't deal with you. But it turned out that when we went to visit the potential supplier, it was a family-owned farm. They'd been running it for generations. They planted 10 trees for every one tree that they harvested. They'd been building pockets of nature all the way through the farm and rewilding margins, and minimal use of fertilizers. But if we hadn't asked, they wouldn't have told us. So due diligence has that sort of level of finding those amazing examples of great practice as well, and I think that a level of partnership with our suppliers to help them move on and improve. Around say the Scope 3 side of things, we've had a partnership with the university for the last couple of years, linking them up with some of our strategic suppliers and saying, can you help our UK suppliers calculate their carbon emissions? And working with our suppliers. Now, one thing I do worry about is the level of data burden that we put on our procurement teams is drawing away from that potential sort of focus and time spent on innovation and finding the ways to really work with our suppliers to make things better and to identify the things they really are doing well rather than trying to find all the things they're not doing so well. We do need to do that, but I think we have to get the balance right.
So actually highlight more of the best practice and help that pulls more people up as well.
Mm-hmm.
Indeed, yeah. It's that example that brings the rest up as well. Yeah, indeed.
I think all the businesses here have supply chains. So, Mark.
Yeah, I don't have a lot to add to Bibi and Jerome's comments, but I think I would just say, your last comment is absolutely right, Jerome. We all operate in pressured supply chains. Lewis mentioned the exponential growth of data centers, and that has an impact on the supply chain that we both have within our businesses of, things like generators, buzzbars, whatever the technical components are that you put into a data center, they are all in high demand at the moment. So there's a lot of pressure on the supply chain. So, as you say, Jerome, introducing lots of tests and checks and balances has an impact on that, right? So I do think it's important to step back from that, but I also think it's incredibly important and to really have rigorous supplier onboarding. From our perspective, a lot of that is around the Scope 2, Scope 3 emissions reporting of our supply chain. With Octopus's backing, that's incredibly important. Maybe we were talking a bit about reporting previously, but that's an incredibly important way that we think about our supply chain. But it is trying to strike a balance between doing the right thing, making sure you're not turning suppliers away by overburdening them or making your supply chain much more complex, but making sure that you have those checks and balances in place. It's a balance. It is a tough balance to strike, actually.
Anything to add, Liz?
Only that I think fundamentally these conversations always come down to data at the lowest level generally, and you often find in those supply chains that the data becomes an antagonist between the supply chain and the people who want it, and it's like a 6 degrees of separation kind of thing. As the bigger you are, you're in the middle, and I need this data, and it goes to somebody else, and and it goes down. And I think a couple of things I think we've seen evolving over time is that one is that at a macro level, it's very hard for individual companies. You can't solve anything on your own. In terms of that, a good example is like sort of our data centers, which are in Washington, and the big complexes there. Well, of the chips come into the port of Old El Paso in Texas. So as part of our supply chain work in terms of doing stuff, you form partnerships. We did partnership with like PepsiCo, Maersk, and a few others. Because part of the thing is you've got to get, you can change your supply chain to get the ships, to bring the chips from Korea into the thing. But they've then got to get from Old El Paso in Texas to DC. So the partnerships there look along the lines of funding electrification of the I-90 highway, so that you can start to speed up the transition of the supply chain partners to electrified vehicles to bring your stuff. So but you can only do that in partnership, I think, that kind of stuff. And the other one then is a good example, is a company called Moderator in the UK that do supply chain stuff, and they build digital twins of products. So like their example that they use, Jason uses, their CEO, is always like, it's like a Waitrose lasagna. And you think about there's like 90 different things that go into a Waitrose lasagna. But if you try to get the actual exact data for those kind of things, you get so far, then you fall off a cliff. And virtually every product at the moment is like that, where you get to a certain point and then you just don't get the data from your supply chain. And just standing there demanding a better spreadsheet to come in doesn't work. So we're in that position where you get so far, and then technology and data can then help you. So what Moderator are doing as a platform, as an example, is they help model with agreement from all of the constituent peoples what the tolerance level of a synthetic data element would be for that product. The idea being that you get a more complete picture as an industry to understand what it might be, and then you can work to fill in the gaps over time. So I think there's a lot of that, and I think that you see that inside of the organizations as well, is where everybody's doing sustainability reporting. The challenge is it doesn't just become AN of the reporting function, whereas you go to the heads of the business and you say, what are you doing in sustainability? They go, oh, we're doing great stuff. There's our annual report, or there's a sustainability report. Well, who's in charge of it? Well, Jeff does. And it's Jeff and Jeff's team who would put it, and they spend all their time getting data and crunching numbers, those kind of things, where it really needs to be everybody's got skin in the game for sustainability, because every part of every business is underpinned by data and usage. And I think that connection of making people more aware of it, so they have some responsibility for it right across the business, means it's not just another Excel reporting function to press a button in Workiva to do a report, because that's failing if it does that.
And Mark, you look like you wanted to come in.
Yeah, I was just something we were talking about before, Richard. And you're referencing the reporting side of things. I do think what's the right way to express this? We need to try to generate a customer pull on this reporting. And Rich, I know we talked about it before in terms of reporting. I feel a little bit underqualified talking about reporting with KPMG as the lead sponsor, obviously.
If you want to talk about reporting, please find me afterwards.
Shameless plug. There we go.
You teed it.
No, but look, I think we've seen a. I'm not going to get into politics, so forget the US for a second because that's on its own different journey at the moment. I think we've seen a movement from a customer base that is perhaps, I don't want to call it greenwashing, but certainly looking for PR opportunities in sustainability, looking for, doing perhaps doing the right thing because they know it's the right thing, to a world now where reporting is becoming really important, right? It's not just becoming important because it's the right thing to do, but it's becoming important because clients are demanding it, and they're demanding it because they have to report. And it does feel to me, again, much less qualified than yourself, Richard, that we're in a moment right now where perhaps the path isn't completely clear as to what reporting looks like and why people are necessarily doing it. But I think what we're perhaps doing now and what we're seeing our clients doing now is creating a baseline, trying to understand the right way to report on particularly things like carbon emissions and so forth, so that over the coming years, when that actually does start to have financial impact on them, they will be well equipped to deal with that, to be industry leading, to have that kind of level of disclosure. So on our invoicing, we will have carbon impact, we will have scope 3, we will, we think about EU taxonomy, all this kind of stuff. So I think we're at a point right now where the landscape isn't completely clear. Perhaps you can clarify it for people, but it is becoming very important from a customer pull perspective for us.
I always say we don't actually just sell Quorn nuggets to the retailers, because our customers are the retailers. It's Tesco's, it's Sainsbury's, it's Morrison's. We're selling them Quorn nuggets, Quorn mints, but we're selling them credible data as well. That's just as much of a product now, and that's what they require, because they want us to have aggregated the data in the supply chain up until that point credibly, robustly, and hand that over as part of a whole package to them.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, I've been working in sustainability for like 25 years. I feel very old, but it's definitely been a long journey from the passion and the principles of like a movement in the early days around that sort of passion and principles driven approach, but the transition into a more sort of mechanistic, data-driven, sort of investor-driven, potentially, and credibility-driven paradigm has been, palpable over the last few years. But I think, you've got a combination between, say, a sleek vehicle and an engine. Which of those two things are the most important? Well, they're both important, but actually, who's most interested in which of those two things? And I think, you can't really sell the sleek vehicle without actually having a decent engine in it. And I think we're at that point now where we're getting the balance between those two things right. It does feel like the CSRD, in terms of data reporting, was Icarus flying a bit too close to the sun. I think we've got to find that sweet spot between those two things, where we do present what's important to people in a way that's credible, but we don't have to show all the wiring to everybody all the time. And I think that is a really interesting place to be. It's a great maturation and evolution of this entire area of work. And I think it's the right route to take. But I think we're almost there, I think, in terms of finding that sweet spot, but not quite.
And we did do a lot of work with people on CSRD, but I would still say it was a sledgehammer to crack a nut to a degree. And I think one of the important things about thinking about reporting is, who does it ultimately get used by? Yeah. So is it decision useful information? You talked about customers, Mark. I guess the other person you often talk about, or should be talking about, is the investor. So how is the investor using that data? And maybe sticking with Jerome, I know you've got targets out there. How do you think about those? Do you have investor conversations around it?
Yes. This is a short answer. Do you want a
That's
longer
a
one?
bad question. Could you expand on that?
So, I mean, we are, as I said earlier, we're a private equity-owned business. I mean, in theory, being a private equity-owned business means, we should have a slightly lower reporting burden, but it doesn't work like that at all. I mean, our guests, have an expectation, as you say, as you alluded to earlier, that we do everything right, and we do try to fulfil that expectation, of course. But we get a lot of challenge actually from our staff and from our investors, and that tends to be where more of the questions come from. When you allude to some of the politics, obviously there's a hot and cold on ESG and net zero from various quarters, but we don't see that in terms of the level of interest we get from our private equity owners and from bondholders. I've had 2 questions in the last week around environment and sustainability and the things that we're doing, and we get, contact every other day from our colleagues asking us about or giving us ideas of things that they want to see done. But in terms of how we show that, I mean, we have had absolute targets. We set those, I think, since 2010 for achieving reductions in water, energy, waste, carbon emissions, and those sorts of things. But we're now moving into having, because we're a growth-focused business, and obviously, one of the reasons we get invested in as a private equity investment is that we are a growing business. So you can't really be a growing business and have absolute reduction targets. So, as we're building our extension in Ireland, we're adding district heating with air source heat pumps, powered by 100% renewable energy. But if we have absolute targets, all that shows us is an increase in carbon emissions, an increase in energy consumption. So we're in negotiation and discussion and support from our private equity owners to shift to having more intensity-based targets over the next 5 years with our rebaseline. It's the right direction to travel for a business like us, but we've had a lot of support.
Yeah, I find it quite interesting on everyone thinks about private equity, and this isn't a plug necessarily for private equity, but private equity is quite short term. And yet, interestingly, in a world of quarterly targets to stock markets, what we're finding is our private equity are often taking more of that 5 to 7 year view to invest through the cycle rather than quarterly reporting. But maybe if I turn to you, and you're owned, or Quorn is owned by a multinational company.
Me personally.
That would take us back to modern slavery.
Yes.
But,
Quorn has quite an interesting ownership structure. It's owned by a Filipino company, but it's and when we're talking about this time frames, it's interesting because actually it's a family-owned Philippine company from the Philippines. So they started making noodles in their backyard, and now they're a multi-billion peso company. So they're a massive, massive company, but they are still family-owned. One of the reasons that they bought us was because the head of the company, Henry, is a vegan, and he really believes in animal rights, alternative proteins. So we've had a few tricky years recently, but he really has committed. It's been about 9 years since they bought us. They've really committed to keeping on investing in us, keeping on building with us, because where we're talking about that 5 to 7 year outlook, family businesses are much more likely to think generationally because they're planning on passing this business down. What I really like is that investors are people too, and actually they're existing in the same world, having these same conversations with their families as we are, and it's great if they're bringing those decisions to your table as well. So it works quite well for us in terms of reporting because that's what they want from us.
And that must be a fascinating table to sit at.
Yes.
I'm going to jump on to the final question. So if people in the audience are thinking about Q&A, start scribbling them down or thinking to stick your hand up. But before we move on to audience Q&A, it would be great to talk a little bit more about engagement with employees and customers. And we've touched on this as we've gone through. Maybe, Bibi, if we start with you.
Yeah, this is something that's really, really important to us as Quorn Foods. So I really view myself as kind of a head coach for sustainability rather than head of sustainability. I do some of the doing, but actually very little of the doing. Everybody in our business has one net positive objective in their personal development goals each year. So that means 1/4 of their work is supposed to be helping us on a social or environmental sustainability. So that might be people in our NPD teams. I'm thinking of the conversations I've had over the last 6 weeks. People in our NPD teams integrating that into our stage gate processes right at the very beginning. So if a product's going to fail on its carbon footprint at the end of the stage gate process, I want it to fail at the beginning instead. So they're integrating that into stage gate. Got people on IT working on our digital efficiency, but also digital cultural ways of working as well. People in food distribution, we got all of a cross-functional team working on food redistribution that we won some awards for last year, which was quite a strange thing to win some awards for, because what we did was we got people in different teams to talk to each other. And I was worried that won awards, to be honest. Because we redistributed 1.6 million portions of food, but they literally did just talk to each other. I thought, what's everybody else doing? And really, what we've got from this process, we've been doing it for 3 years now, and what you do is you don't just give people the agency to do it, you give them the time, and you give them the resource that you say, we expect this from you. And we see it in our numbers when we do our employee surveys. People really appreciate that. So if anybody's working in businesses where you think, oh my God, I'm absolutely snowed under as a sustainability manager, which I know happens quite a lot, you don't have to be the expert on human rights risks in supply chains, because I bet there's somebody in your procurement team who'd be really interested in helping out with that. Working out how can you supply that agency to the people in your business is so important, and it makes your life a lot easier too.
Do any of the other panel want to come in? I've just had the flash of 10 minutes, but we'll just keep going.
Just really quickly, I mean, that's really inspiring. I think, that sort of collective genius of your workforce, the enthusiasm and tapping into that to actually really drive things forward is really key. I think we've seen over the last few years, we've had things like ISO 14001 in place across all of our villages. We've got corporate targets. We've got village environmental management teams, but often the message can stop. Yeah. At a sort of middle senior management level, and not go down, and engage those who really want to be engaged, actually. And I think we've over the last year and a half, we've been pivoting a bit more towards our staff engagement and using that collective genius of those enthusiastic people who spend all day in the forest, and actually see what happens to the food waste, and understand the issues we're dealing with packaging and where it goes, so. And the things we've been getting back are really, really exciting. And we've got people proposing...
And people talking to each other.
Yeah, and talking to each other, naturally. Things like, we've had staff suggesting we use the Too Good To Go programme. So we repackage food that's close to the sell-by date and sell it on to staff at a very low rate. So it's a really nice sort of social, environmental integration, a whole host of other things, but it's just one suggestion. But I think tapping into that enthusiasm is so important.
Because you can't be an expert in everything, and people are experts in their own
sphere of
influence. Yeah, exactly.
We have employee resource groups inside Microsoft, and by a country mile, they're all self-forming, obviously globally, but by a country mile, the largest one is the sustainability community. It's that big that they have separate country chapters, and in the US, actually, some of them are city chapters as well. It's huge in terms of it's one of the biggest engagement platforms, and they're very vocal. Those people, we have a direct line then into Melanie, who's our sort of global sustainability, and she reports directly into Brad Smith, who's obviously on the board, and he's like our chief lawyer, that kind of stuff. So they're not. No one's scared about talking up to management, that kind of stuff. There's a challenge of there's that problem that you have of working for a Microsoft when it's consumption-driven business, and you've got the same problems you have in terms of building and the insatiable demand for compute and stuff. But yeah, it's by far the biggest passionate group internally in doing stuff. And we see that evidence. We run a global hackathon event every year for every single employee. Every year, in the last 2 years, the number one funded or project that's gone through have been sustainability initiatives where cross-functional, multi-country teams have built product and capability all around sustainability is definitely a focus for everybody.
So I want this panel to go on for like 2 hours because I think we're having a brilliant conversation. I did promise Q&A, so I'm just going to quickly look to see whether... First hand I saw was the lady at the front. Oh, we need a microphone. James will.
Thank you, Norms.
If you could just say who you are, where you're from, and then your question.
Hello, my name's Emma, and I'm from a business called Good Business, and we run a sustainability leaders panel, so I'd love to invite you all to join that separately. But my question is about collaboration. So a few of you mentioned how partnerships are key, and I wonder if you've got any sort of pre-competitive examples of how partnerships have helped accelerate change in your industries. Thank you.
Big one for us was with the greenwashing thing. For a couple of years back, when everybody was investing in forests and replanting things like that, and most of those, if you look at the meta-analysis, most of those turned into junk because they're things. So one of the things we've done, because we spend a lot of money on these kind of initiatives, a good example is the Symbiosis Coalition. So that was a funding together where instead of people coming with RFPs to Microsoft directly saying we want to go and invest in a reforesting project in Peru, it's pooling together like Meta, Salesforce, typical enemies or frenemies, as you say, together, but combining those together so there's a single entry point for RFP provision, but tying that together through the Symbiosis Coalition, which runs as a not-for-profit, with proper agro-scientists and auditability as well, which is the key thing. So those kind of things, I think, are good examples of people you traditionally would think are competitive, but pooling financial resources together to make a change on forestry and things like that is quite interesting.
Something that we're really keen on as Quorn Foods is academic industrial partnerships. So we had our first paper published before any Quorn was sold. Like, actually, what is this food? Can we eat it? And that's something that we've done throughout. So we work really closely with our local universities. Either that's on fermentation, on the nutrition, on sustainability, and I love them. I absolutely love them. If anybody is from universities, make sure you're working with industry. If you are from industry, make sure you're working with universities, because they're such different skill sets that they really complement each other and really build things up.
I'd agree with that completely. I think, the partnership with Nottingham-Trent University we've had around carbon footprinting. Students have learned how to do carbon footprinting. The businesses have gained a carbon footprint. We've gained a business in our supply chain with a carbon footprint. There's so many social and environmental benefits that come out of that sort of collaboration. Really important. But there's a really nice example we've got at the moment around a community collaboration. So we've been working for the last 10 years with the British Heart Foundation. So we have 4,500 odd lodges, and we do have to turn over the furniture and the contents of those lodges to refresh them. So we've partnered with the BHF for the last 10 years for them to come and clear furniture that we no longer, or products that we no longer have use for, and then to sell it in their shops. And of course, for us, if we didn't have that partnership, we'd have to pay for that to be disposed. It would be part of our waste stream. It's actually not at the end of its life. It's the end of its useful life in our lodges, but it's definitely got a potential second life. So it's recycled, and it earns money for the British Heart Foundation. So
I love the circularity, and we also have the whole circularity on electrons being used twice as well.
We hit £1 million worth of donation or raised with the British Heart Foundation 2 weeks ago. So it was really an exciting moment.
That's great.
Mark, did you want to add anything on that? Because I am conscious.
No, I'm conscious as well. I could do, but let's carry on. Yeah.
So I know there are lots of questions and there were lots of hands up. We started a little bit late, and I know there are other sessions starting to happen around about now. I think when we come off the stage, there'll be a chance to grab our panelists and have a quick chat. And certainly when we did this event last year in London, we had queues, so that was amazing. So hold those questions. But maybe as we start to think about wrapping up, maybe 30 seconds each, and I'll just go down the line. So starting with Bibi, in terms of any final reflections you have from this panel.
I'd say it's the importance of involving all stakeholders. So, and your colleagues, they're a big part of that stakeholder group, but your supply chain, environment, making sure that these are not decisions made in isolation, and actually really meaning that as well, doing it properly, investing that into processes like your stage gate process, not just saying, oh, we'll think about nature sometimes. Actually, is it an agenda item? Is it part of that process that you have to actually get through jump something to get there. Really integrate it in.
I'd say, while the journey with, say, UK CFD and CSRD and the one to come with SRS, have been a roller coaster and tortuous, one might say. I'm quite happy we could do it in-house with a bit of support from KPMG. But actually, that journey is really important. Understanding the things that are material to your business, even if you don't have to. I think actually doing that double materiality assessment. I'm glad we were required to, because we've gained so much from it in terms of understanding, the areas that we actually add value and have a net positive impact on the world, as well as the areas where we clearly have to comply with the law and have to mitigate our impacts. I think it's a really valuable journey to crystallize what's important in terms of strategy and build, as you say, brand resilience, business resilience, climate resilience, all of these things. So, while it's painful, it's productive.
Thank you. Mark?
Yeah, sure. So I've got a challenge to everyone here, actually. So on the one hand, I think we've talked a lot about trying to balance this sort of why did I decide to say that? Inexorable huge rise of the requirement for data centres globally. That's undoubtedly going to be the case. But the balance of that versus grid constraints versus people perhaps not wanting something built in their local environment. I guess my challenge to you is data centers are going to happen. They're going to be built. We need them for our modern society. It is the new industrial revolution. So my challenge to you is that I think we should be trying to embrace this. I think we should be trying to think about how you can, in the West Yorkshire and Northern community, build them in the right way, make sure that they are seen and forced to be a force for good, for environment, for social, and actually for the economic benefit of the region. So that's my challenge to you. Make sure you're taking this thing that is coming anyway and crafting it in the right way for your region.
Yeah, I think mine would echo Mark really. I think we're in the changes in inevitability, I think, is baked in now in terms of change. And I think probably the most important thing for everybody to realise individually and for businesses is that the pace at which the world is going to change because of the way technology is diffusing means that every individual you've got to have your own sensing function. You have to develop the skills, just like another muscle memory, another skill, to be able to understand how the world is changing at such a pace and what it means for you. And you have to be able to have that and distill that sensing function into the business as well, because it's so rapid. Unless you develop that skill to really make sense of the world of what's going on, we're not going to change fast enough to absorb it, and that has a direct effect then on the efficiency and the effectiveness that affects sustainability, because we'll use everything badly, and it's the pace at which you can sense and understand the shifts and the changes is going to be massively important.
And I think it's quite interesting, as I bring us to a close, you touched on pace. I think there's also a challenge on quite a lot of these initiatives are multi-year. And I think one of the challenges that I see is we live in almost quarterly annual reporting cycles. We're not being political, but political cycles are short. And yet, actually, some of the investments we're talking about here will be 2, 3, 5 year investments. So I think one of the challenges societally and also in businesses is how do we navigate that tension between the short term and the long term? And as leaders, custodians of some of the world's most influential organisations, we've got an opportunity to lean into that transformational value and change, to look at commitments, to look at the transition journeys. We haven't really touched on adaptation, but adaptation, I think, is going to be a big theme, particularly as we look at the impact of changing society, changing climate, and all of the things that we've touched on today. But around that, there's a huge value opportunity as well. So let's not just look at the downsides, let's see where the opportunities are. So I think we've ranged across a lot of topics. As I mentioned, but in running out of time for Q&A, please do take the opportunity to talk to the panellists as we come off the stage. But I'd like to say a big thank you to my panellists, so to Bibi, Jerome, Mark and Lewis. Thank you so much, and thank you to the audience for spontaneous applause. That's always good. Just so that you know, KPMG are involved in a range of panels and workshops here today and tomorrow. You can find out much more on the app, which I think controls everything that we do. While we're here, I'm sure there's a data centre sitting behind it somewhere. Hopefully it's one going into a heat network. So thank you very much for your attention, and enjoy the rest of the Reset Connect experience.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.